NASA says its Voyager 1 probe, the most distant human-made object in the universe, is sending usable information to Earth again.
After nearly 50 years and more than 23 billion kilometers of mileage, Voyager is finally responding clearly to us again after months of sputtering gibberish. And what it just said could probably change everything we know and hold dear. This isn't just another dusty, boring line of code or a blurry image from deep space. These latest signals, they're unlike anything Voyager's ever sent us before. And they demand that we listen, because if this data is correct, then there's something out there, and it's moving in ways that we've never ever seen before, and we need to be worried. But for us to really come to grips with how big this latest development is, we need to stop for a moment and go back to Voyager's origins. When engineers first sent out Voyager in the 70s, on September 5th, 1977, to be precise, they would never have thought that nearly 50 years later, the spacecraft would still be running. At most, it was meant to last beyond the early 2000s, after which they expected it would disintegrate into tiny bits and scatter itself across the solar system. In fact, in 2004, a setback that could have ended the whole mission occurred. Voyager 1's primary thrusters failed, and so the backup ones have been the ones in use since then. But today, nearly half a century later, we're still in contact with Voyager and sending it commands which take nearly 2 days to reach because of the distance, and in return, receiving first-person images and data about the world that exists beyond the stars. What's even more baffling is that, as old and rickety as this spacecraft is, it has achieved one of mankind's greatest ever feats, crossing the heliosphere. If you're wondering what that is, the heliosphere is an invisible bubble that our sun blows around itself. Except, this isn't just any ordinary bubble. It's a vast shield of charged particles and magnetic fields streaming outward at supersonic speed. Inside it, we're protected from the raw, high-energy cosmic radiation that interstellar space is teeming with. But outside this bubble, at its edge, the heliopause, the sun's influence fades and the galaxy takes over. And yet, for years, the Voyager kept on riding this wave, riding across the edge of time and space, like a leaf in the wind, until on August 25, 2012, for Voyager 1, and then 6 years later on November 5, 2018, for Voyager 2, something monumental happened. Both spacecraft crossed that boundary. To tell you how huge that was, no other man-made object had ever done that before. And to think that the first time that would happen, it would be two antiques, is absolutely baffling. They'd now left behind the familiar hum of the sun's plasma and had crossed into the alien silence of interstellar space. This wasn't just a huge step for spacecraft. This was a step for all of humanity. For the first time in our existence, we had finally physically left home. Now, 7 years later, Voyager has made possibly its greatest achievement yet. The story starts when scientists who have routinely received data from Voyager suddenly got a very anomalous signal, a flicker of light quite different from anything they'd ever gotten before. This wasn't a star, or a planet, or a technical glitch they could easily explain away. At first, everyone thought this was just a blip in the endless stream of data they'd been getting from the probe. You see, in such circles, it is expected to get a wrong reading or two once in a while. Cosmic rays, interference from deep space dust, or even software hiccups. These things are bound to happen. It's outer space, an unimaginably vast expanse, with 1% of it made up of dust that has absorbed radiation. Even the tiniest speck floating in the dark can bend light, scramble signals, and confuse even the most precise instruments. So yes, it's likely to get a weird signal occasionally. And at first, the team at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab dismissed the signal as nothing more than background noise. But the more they looked, the more they realized something wasn't right. You see, initially, this reading seemed to be nothing more than just a faint reflection of light picked up by Voyager's sensors. And it had looked so minor that they deemed it not worthy investigating any further. But then hours, then days passed, and something changed. Researchers noticed repetition. This wasn't just any faint light. This flicker, it had a pattern. and background noise doesn't repeat itself. Over the next 72 hours, that strange flicker kept showing up again and again, each time with the same rhythm, the same energy signature. And what was most unsettling was the same apparent movement across the black canvas of space. There was an object out there, and it wasn't just floating randomly through space, tumbling across the galaxy. No, this thing had direction. It seemed to know where it was going, how it would be going. This object had a mind of its own. It slowed down, it sped up, it curved. It did things that were characteristic of something moving intentionally, not being pushed around by the elements in outer space. According to system analysts, this object moved more like a drone than a piece of rock floating aimlessly through outer space. Faced with such an anomaly, scientists had to run their diagnostics multiple times, just to be sure that the long hours spent looking at supercomputers hadn't begun getting to them at last. But when magnetometers showed organized movements and plasma sensors detected rhythmic pulses, it became harder to convince themselves that something wasn't off. For years, they had been shouting into a void, hoping for a response, and now, without any warning, it seemed as if something was shouting back at them. Unlike most other objects in space, which tumble like a rock across a puddle, this object was gliding smoothly, as if something was guiding it. But the mysteries of this case do not nearly end here, because when ground teams pulled up all of the full telemetry logs and analyzed all of the data they'd gotten, what they discovered left them wide-eyed. There wasn't just one object. When NASA would eventually round up their findings, they'd counted 305 of these flying objects. Flying, not drifting, and that's when the shock deepened. Further tests continued and something else began to pop up. They already knew these objects were moving with a striking precision, but now it began to become apparent that they were also traveling on a trajectory that couldn't be explained by just gravity, solar wind, or any of the other forces that typically influence objects that are in space. They were going somewhere, and it looked like someone or something was guiding them towards that destination, adjusting its course with laser-sharp precision. Naturally, with such an occurrence, it was only natural that different hypotheses would begin flying around, and now it was up to these scientists to whittle down the possibilities. Already, they knew that these objects weren't the product of coincidence or accident, but rather a mark of intent. But they still couldn't figure out what these objects were. In that case, the next possible line of action would be to figure out what they weren't. So they began checking through a list of familiar possibilities. Could this be a small moon or a distant comet, a new asteroid? But one by one, each of these possibilities began to seem less and less probable. These objects weren't planets. No, they were far too small. And calling them comets wouldn't make any sense either, as they had no tail, ice trail, or heat signature. Again, they didn't glow like stars, and gravitational lensing couldn't explain what they were seeing. And this could definitely not be space dust. Under no possible circumstances does dust suddenly change direction mid-flight. Not here on Earth, not there in outer space. Outer space is vast, full of vast numbers of different possibilities, and it would be easy to get lost amidst the noise without the guidance of a bearing, which is why physics has been a framework for our space probes for so long. We've tested everything we've come across in relation to the laws of physics, and up until now, they've always succumbed to it. But this new anomaly broke those rules. For years, everything we've seen in outer space has moved in patterns, loops, spirals, and curves that we can track and predict. Even the chaos out there isn't totally random. Everything holds a hidden pattern of order. One of the strangest examples of such is something scientists call the arches of chaos. These are invisible pathways shaped by the push and pull of gravity around special points in space, called Lagrange points. From these zones, you get both safe highways as well as unstable escape routes that stretch out across the solar system. These pathways, although invisible, allow transport of everything from comets to asteroids, and even spacecraft over very long distances. But it's not just the orbits that exhibit a hidden order. Take, for example, ice in deep space. On a first glance, it would look fragile and formless, but under the right conditions, it locks into crystalline grids, far above the planets, clinging to moons, or drifting around comets. This ice forms repeating atomic patterns unlike anything on Earth. So even though ice is floating around seemingly formless in space, it's still obeying clear orders etched into its build. Both phenomena prove one thing: the universe is a strange mix of disorder and precision, or at least a precision we've gotten used to. But then, all of a sudden, came something that didn't fit into any script we'd had before. It wasn't just wandering, it moved like it had a destination, and that's when everything hit. This wasn't natural. It had either been built or was being steered, and if that was the case, then it wasn't just moving through space. It might have been moving towards something, and if it was being controlled, then whoever was controlling it could be watching it. And if we'd seen these objects that were being controlled by someone, could that someone had seen Voyager? Could it have seen us? Its path bent in ways that didn't match any known orbital behavior. There wasn't any drift or decay here, which normally would be expected from natural objects. The team was forced to admit something uncomfortable. What they were seeing wasn't just unnatural. The movement patterns suggested intelligence, or at the very least, design. While this was a very exciting possibility, it was also deeply unsettling. If this wasn't a natural phenomena, then what exactly had Voyager encountered in the deep darkness of the cosmos? But there was hardly any time to come to terms with that, because just when everyone thought this could not get any more complex, another piece of news arrived, and this broke everything. Elsewhere, Voyager 1's twin, the Voyager 2, traveling some millions of miles in a completely different direction, had picked up on something eerily similar. The same kind of pulse, the same kind of magnetic fluctuation. It was almost as if whatever was out there wasn't bound to just one location in space. Now remember, the two spacecraft are flying so far apart that it is almost impossible for them to detect anything so similar at almost the same moment, unless this thing was something massive, something that was everywhere. This ruled out the possibility of any internal error. Instead, it was more like two lighthouses had caught a flash of something passing between them, and that meant this newest development now had plenty of weight behind it. Before then, it could have been argued that Voyager 1 was simply just acting up. But now, with its twin probe witnessing a similar event, it meant that all of humanity would have to stop and listen. Now the chatter began turning into whispers, and the whispers in turn into frantic late-night calls. And yet, as if all of this wasn't already strange enough, Voyager itself began acting up. Ground teams began noticing that the spacecraft's guidance system, its attitude and articulation control system, or AACS, was rerouting its data through long, unused systems. It was as if the machine was acting on its own, ignoring its own core software. At first, engineers thought it was a simple bug. After all, this was a spacecraft that had been on the move for almost 50 years, running code older than most of the people now analyzing it. But the deeper they looked, the stranger this became. Voyager wasn't failing. It wasn't malfunctioning. It was reconfiguring itself. Memory segments that had been dormant for decades suddenly reactivated. Telemetry was rerouted in ways that had never been programmed. But why? There were no definite answers, only a sea of possibilities. It could be that that burst had flipped a single bit of memory, perhaps triggered by some buried, dormant function deep inside Voyager's ancient architecture. No one could say for sure, but one thing was unarguable. This pattern was too systematic, too clean, to be just mere data corruption. Voyager might have still been listening, still taking orders, but it was also doing things it had never been designed to do. So they could understand what was going on, engineers dug deep, looking into file cabinets for assembly language codes as old as the 70s. The only issue here was time. Every test was painfully slow. Voyager might still take orders from Earth, but those directions each take 22 hours to reach it. That's another 22 hours till a response could be received. That's 44 hours for a single change. There was no room for any mistakes, but still the teams pressed on, carefully writing patches, rebooting subsystems, and reactivating routines that had last been used since before their births. Their grand aim? Resetting the system without wiping off its memory. At the end, the results of their efforts were both promising and terrifying. Voyager was still stable, its instruments were fine, but the strange new behavior wasn't going away. Whatever was making Voyager act this way wasn't internal decay, nor some random software corruption. Something had touched Voyager, and it was different now. As mysterious signals continued to pulse through Voyager's instruments, an even stranger realization began taking shape. Within the plasma wave readings, certain patterns stood out. They were odd pulses, and they didn't behave like any natural energy bursts. They were structured, measured, and intentional. And that's when somebody noticed it. These waveforms bore a striking semblance to quantum oscillations, the kind used in modern quantum entanglement experiments here on Earth to transmit information between particles across vast distances. And if that was the case, then what if Voyager hadn't just been recording random events? What if our greatest sentinel had gotten itself woven into something far bigger than any of us could have imagined? Maybe this extraterrestrial intelligence had just been broadcasting data using methods we don't yet know or understand. And maybe, by accident, Voyager was in the vicinity at the time with the right sensors to pick up on these signals. Hypothesis. With every new data packet that Voyager sent back home, more questions arose. Scientists found themselves torn between multiple uncomfortable possibilities. Some believed that the objects Voyager had found might be just like it, advanced engineered machines, created by a non-human intelligence, basically alien probes. But others, putting forward a less fantastic possibility, claim that these objects were probably some natural but exotic phenomena, maybe particles or cosmic forces that we haven't yet identified, which would explain why they were operating in ways that didn't submit to our laws of physics as we understand them. And yet, none of these answers were particularly comforting. If they were probes, then who was probing? Who sent them? And also, how long had they been traveling? Why did they not stop to investigate our own solar system? Did they get our message from the gold-plated disc? Really, the disc had been more than a mere message in a bottle. It was our handshake to the cosmos. We'd curated it like a playlist, a mixtape of sounds and sights from our civilization. Had they seen it and possibly decided not to respond? Too focused on whatever cosmic errand they might be running for any detours. But then, if they were natural, that would be even more worrisome. It would reinforce an age-old belief that the universe holds systems and rules and energies that we haven't even begun to catch a grasp of. And from the looks of it, we probably never will. We're talking about random objects that were gliding through space in organized patterns, sending pulses, creating magnetic shifts, and displaying behaviors we'd never witnessed before. That kind of unknown is even more unsettling than the probe theory. But this story gets even more complicated because as these objects passed through Voyager, the spacecraft's local plasma field didn't just react. It changed. The density of the charged particles began fluctuating in clean, measured patterns. Magnetic fields warped around the objects. This wasn't chaotic or random. It looked more akin to a design, as if the objects were shaping the space around them, moving not with engines or any combustion, but rather propelling themselves with the medium of space itself. Now, the possibility of paranormal activity was starting to surface, but this was nothing like fiction. This was real. This was the word's original meaning, something outside the normal experience. This didn't fit into the physics textbook, and yet it was happening, being recorded by not one, but two trusted probes, being verified by hundreds of monitors, and the best scientists. This was serious. And yet, beyond NASA's Jet Propulsion Labs, the implications this holds for the rest of humanity are even more concerning. Think about it. If Voyager truly got touched, altered by something out there, then mankind is no longer just an observer of the cosmos. We've now become participants, whether we like it or not. If those structured pulses were really a form of quantum transmission, then those 3,305 objects weren't just drifting through space. They must have been communicating, broadcasting information on a scale we can't yet comprehend. This could be the most profound discovery we've ever made. We now have concrete proof of not just life outside of our Earth, but also of an advanced intelligence actively operating in our galactic neighborhood. But as exciting as that is, we have to ask the other questions. Now that we're listening, Have they figured out that we were eavesdropping? Do they know where we are? And if they do, what does that mean for us? For world leaders, this is tough. An unplanned signal exchange with an unknown, very likely superior intelligence is definitely going to make a few decision makers lose sleep. If we decide to reach out to these extraterrestrials, we can't hang up. Once the link is made, it might be impossible to sever. And for the rest of us, the news leaks in fragments, deleted articles, hushed-up scientists, and vague news headlines. Voyager anomaly, unexpected data patterns. NASA is staying very tight-lipped with whatever they're putting out, and while you could understand that they're trying to reduce widespread panic, for the few of us who know what has transpired, fear levels are off the roof. The big fear here isn't just what Voyager is receiving, but rather what it might be sending. Those reactivated memory banks, the unusual way telemetry was rerouted. What if they aren't just changes to how Voyager talks to us, but also changes in who it's talking to? And trust, this isn't just idle paranoia. History is full of examples where first contact between human civilizations ended catastrophically for the less advanced side. And from the looks of it, we're far from less advanced. We're newborns. If something as trusted as Voyager could have been rearranged by a passing entity, then we don't have a lot of leverage here. And yet, despite these risks, there's a pull, a compulsion to keep listening, to decode, to understand. Because if the message is meant for us, ignoring it might even be more dangerous than answering. But what do you make of all this? Should we just leave these entities alone? Or do we take active steps towards reaching out to them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And before you leave, check out our video on Voyager 1's cousin, Voyager 2, and the way the latest pulses that it relayed back home are turning the science world on its head.